Okay, welcome back to part three. And so when we were last talking, we were discussing Gillian Waring, this piece. And so she's done a lot of other kind of types of interactional work, such as pieces where basically she got all of her audience to participate in the making of videos and photography. And one of the pieces that she's most famous for is a piece she did shortly after graduate school, where she and a friend basically just got a video camera and a boombox and a 80s music playlist and or a mixtape, and they got on the train, and they just basically stopped at every train station. At every train station, she would get out, she'd put the boombox down, she'd play the radio real loud, and dance like her life depended on it. And her friend would just videotape it and see how people reacted to it. Um, so, anyway, so let's talk about something much more somber and serious. Hiroshi Sugimoto is one of my favorite photographers, one of my favorite contemporary photographers. I think is really important. And one of the things that I love about him is that he's a modernist at heart. He's such a craftsman. He's so interested um, in design in photography and in craft and in so many things that you would think not relate to conceptual art, but he also has a very, very kind of conceptual way of thinking. So a good example of that would be in this particular series of pieces where around the world, I do apologize for the dogs, around the world, um, everywhere he goes, wherever he visits a city where there's a sea, he will take a photograph of that, that view with the sea exactly halfway across across the picture plane, and so it's always exactly the same, and yet it's always different. And he does this for every single spot in the world that he's ever visited. Um, Here's another two sets. I think that photograph of the lightning bolt is just truly extraordinary. I also really love the pieces he does of installations at natural history museums, like natural history dioramas. He also has a whole series of portraits of deceased people where he takes photographs of their wax dummies. And he has this amazing gift to be able to take things that shouldn't look, when photographed, like you see a wax dummy from Madame Tussauds and you see it photographed and they look terrible. And he figures out how to light them so that you can't quite tell, are they real or not real. He's just an amazing craftsman. Okay, anyway, Ai Weiwei is a Chinese artist. I believe is still currently living under house arrest in China, considered something of a dissident. This is one of his early pieces he did after moving back to China. He, through a lot of the late 80s, early 90s, lived in New York, but he went back to China to further push his art career. And this is one of the pieces he did where he documented himself dropping a Han Dynasty urn. And part of the point of this piece was to just kind of emphasize how much all the development in China was destroying all the archaeological history of China. And but here's probably one of his more famous pieces, which is the sunflower pieces. And in this, all these sunflower seeds, and but every single one of those sunflower seeds is not actually a sunflower seed. Every single one of them is a handmade piece of ceramic, of China ceramic. Each one is hand painted, handmade and hand painted, and fired. He basically hired an entire village to work on these pieces, and they worked on it for at least 5 years. They made millions and millions and millions of these. And so when he makes these installations, as you can see, like this is at the Tate Modern, and this space here is like the size of what the British would call a football pitch. It's a really large space, and it's filled at the deepest part to about 2 feet with these sunflower seeds. When you walk across them, it kind of picks up some dust, um, and it's all handmade works of art. So, how does this relate to you? This is kind of the fundamental question. Like, what does this mean? Because the real question that students want to know is, how do I create ideas? How do I generate ideas? And how do I have good ideas? How do I know that my ideas are strong? And so I have a couple of solutions, and I certainly recommend that you maybe come back and read this a little bit more carefully. Keep in mind that the PDF version of this lecture is available on the Canvas page. So one of the ways to do this is to, like number one says, is to use ideation, look for problems, things that are interesting to you that you want to do a lot of research on, do a lot of research, develop a lot of, do mind mapping, do thumbnails, come up with lots of ideas, and start eliminating ideas until you select just the few best ideas, and then create a lot of variations on those ideas, and then edit again. And then really start to figure out, based on that, what your real concept is, and let your idea kind of push you further. But there are lots of ways to do it. I think another way would be to allow the work to speak to you, just try to make a lot of work and really look at all the work that you've made, look at all the work you've made in the past. One of the things I do with a lot of the advanced painting students is, and we'll do this a couple of times in their process, where we will just sit down and look at everything they've made, look at all the pieces they've made for a couple of years, and then kind of just look and try to look for commonalities and think about what the different bodies of work say about the artist. What are some trends? What are some qualities that make sense when you start seeing them as a whole? And another thing we do is we write notes. We kind of like go for yellow ochre first, or when I almost always think about asymmetry, I'm always shifting things to the bottom right, or I seem to really like compositions that are heavy on the top. You start seeing these things, and at first these do not seem like things to notice that have any concept contained in them, but many of them can and do. You just have to kind of like push yourself. You can also learn a lot about yourself by examining your process, looking at the way you make your art, and figuring out what the ideas that are contained in your process, how the way you do the thing has as much content to it as the end result, the product. But I think another fundamental way is to just look at a lot of art, and especially look at a lot of contemporary art. And I think it's good for all of us sometimes, even if we're just doing this conceptually, like just doing it as a mental exercise in our head, is to go back to the way those artists like Kossuth and Lewitt and Baldessari started from. Go back to that place of saying, well, if we were to begin anew, and if we were to just make art that really just questioned what is art and what's the role of art, and how much does art have to be a thing, or how much can it just be a concept? If we were to go back to that place, what kind of artwork would we make? And I think that that's often a good way to kind of spur yourself on to really push yourself to be creative. All right, that is the end of this lecture.